Today we're looking at 4 new switches from NLandKeys, which is a China-based vendor who's brought several switches to the market like the JWK Autumn Rain and the Purple Potato under the name AREG's Keyboard. The switches we're looking at today are manufactured by Grain Gold, which is a smaller manufacturer that once again has little to no company information on the internet. I reached out to Geon because I'd heard on the forums that the Geon sliders he sells were made by Grain Gold, and he didn't have too much info except that they are an independent manufacturer and he was connected to them through TechC. We have a lot of ground to cover with these switches, so let's jump right into it. Right after you jump right onto smashing that like button. The 4 switches we're looking at are the Dreamland Linear and Tactile, and the White Samurai and the Dark Warrior. All 4 switches share similar specs with polycarbonate tops and nylon bottoms. The Dreamland switches differ from the White Samurais and the Dark Warriors in that they have a reinforced palm stem, which is basically a different variation of palm. One thing to note is that all palms are not created equal, and according to Geon, there are over 100 different companies that manufacture palm in China alone, so the possibilities are endless. One other thing to note about all 4 of these switches is their insanely short travel, with a long pole stem that puts total travel at only 3.2 millimeters. These are definitely the shortest travel switches that I've ever tried, and the type feel is really something else, but we'll talk more about how these switches feel after the sound tests. Another area where the switches are slightly different are the springs. They all have a 45 gram actuation, 62 gram bottom out, but the springs have different coatings on them, with the Dreamlands having a prismatic coating and the Dark Warriors and White Samurais having color matched springs. Interestingly, the different colored springs have different degrees of spring noise, with the springs in the Dreamland Linears being the worst offenders, and the black and white springs on the other switches being much better. One other thing I noted was that the coating on the springs isn't too uniform, so there is definitely a little bit of QC that probably needs to be done. While you can't hear it as much in the sound tests, the spring noise is very audible when you hold a loose switch to your ear. But since we don't type with our keyboards to our ears, I didn't find it too much of an issue in normal use. That being said, I think a big part of the reason why the spring noise is more controlled in actual typing is due to the Winglatch design. This is totally my speculation, but I think the more substantial covering over the top housing might work to dampen some of the crap sounds that you can hear compared to the standard Cherry 4-prong. But I'll have to do some more testing to confirm my hypothesis. Let me know what you think in the comments below. So before we go any further, let's take a listen to these switches stock. Due to their similarities, I was sent full sets of the Dreamland Linears and the Dark Warrior Tactiles with comparison samples of the Dreamland Tactiles and the White Samurai Linears. So let's take a quick listen to all 4. So the results were pretty interesting, but they make sense when you think about it. According to the product page for the Dreamland switches, the reinforced palm enhances stiffness while not impacting smoothness. So I'd expect the stem to be harder, which would lead to a sharper overall sound signature. And while the differences were subtle, the Dreamlands are definitely slightly higher pitched in their sound. As for the overall stock experience, I found it to be pretty underwhelming. All of the switches have a decent amount of crap that you can hear during normal typing, and lube is definitely needed. One thing that I wanted to point out though was that I didn't lube the springs on the Dark Warrior switches, as I didn't hear much, if any, spring noise in normal use. On the other hand, I felt like the Dreamland linears definitely could use some lube on the springs, so I bag lubed them with a mix of Krytox 205G0 and GPL 106. Also, the leafs on both the linears and tactiles came lubed on the legs, but I didn't really see any lube on the switches other than on the leaf, so I went ahead and lubed the bottom housing, rear contact point, and rails, all 4 slides of the stem, and the top housing. Let's take a listen to these switches after the lube. After the lube, these switches sound very nice, although they are still not quite as refined as some of the other switches I've tried. There are some residual leaf sounds that I could definitely have fixed, but it was relatively minor and it's totally not necessary. But now I want to talk about the type feel, because the short travel on these switches is kind of disconcerting, and I found myself getting pretty fatigued due to the very quick bottom out, even with the long dual stage springs. These switches definitely take some getting used to, and I found myself with a much slower WPM because I wasn't used to the overall travel. I could see these being really useful for games where a high APM is required, but I think it would definitely take some practice before you got there. So now we need to talk about the place where these switches really shine: the value. At $27.50 for a pack of 110 switches, that works out to just 25 cents per switch. And at that price, and especially considering these switches are very unique in their type feel, I would recommend picking a few up just to try them out. And at the end of the day, you have some very long poles to experiment with for Franken switching. Also, although they ship from China, shipping only costs $5, which is really impressive and still keeps the overall cost at under 30 cents per switch. So at this price point, these 4 grain gold manufactured long poles have no competition that I'm aware of, with the closest being the Maroon manufactured Turbulence and Pleiades switches at 45 cents per switch in stock. And not counting long poles, you of course have the venerable Gatoron yellows and various ACO switches. I haven't had too much of a chance to try out ACOs, but I'm definitely planning on checking them out soon, so make sure you're subscribed. Overall, I think these are a great fun switch to try out, although I definitely recommend picking up some lube because your ears will thank you. Before I go, I'm still trying to figure out how to get you guys samples, and I've been trying of either running the data collection through Discord or Google Forms, but I'm totally open to suggestions, so let me know in the comments below if you have any ideas on how to facilitate this. I also need to figure out how to ship the switches, so please let me know what you think, and maybe if you'd be interested in doing samplers and covering shipping. Check out some more keyboard content here. I'm MakerMods, and I'll catch you in the next video.